Hello everyone. In this video, we are going to learn about exhaustMap. exhaustMap maps each value emitted by a source observable to an inner observable and flattens these observables into a single string. Unlike the other observables, exhaustMap ignores any new inner observable if one is already active. It only processes a new observable while the current one completes. Let's head to the VS Code and try out an example. Now, before we proceed, I just want to let you guys know that we'll be using the same example as we did for other flattening operators. So in case you have already gone through these videos, please feel free to skip this part. Now coming back to our VS Code, we have created a very basic index.html file. We are using RxJS version 7 and Tailwind CSS for styling purpose. We have also created an empty JavaScript file and the same is referred in here. We can hit save. Now if we head to the browser, we can see an empty console. Let's close this. For this example, we'll be using an URL which will help us get certain information, kind of a dummy JSON object for a specific user ID. So const fetch user URL equals this one. The last part in here represents the user ID. Now let us use Ajax to fetch information of this user ID. We'll start by importing Ajax from RxJS.Ajax. Let me just increase the font size. Cool. In here we can write Ajax. Let's create our observable. User observable equals to Ajax.getJSON, and then we can pass this URL. Next, we'll create our observer equals the next notification will just log the value. v console.log v. Let me just use next followed by v. Finally, the subscription mechanism. User observable dot subscribe. Then we'll pass the observer. Hit save. As you can see in the browser, we receive the user information associated with ID 1. Now let's assume that there's an array of user IDs that we receive from an observable. Maybe that observable talks to an API and retrieves these user IDs. And for each of these user IDs, we want to fetch the user information. So how it will look like is const user IDs from, and then we'll use certain dummy IDs. Let me import from RxJS. So what we did was we used the from creation operator and passed it an array of user ID. Next, what we need is for each of these user ID, we want to make an Ajax request and get the information. So let's first comment this out because we no longer need this. And for this observable, let me append it with $. If we do user IDs dot subscribe, we can use or reuse the same observer here. Observer, if we hit save, we can see in the console, the IDs will be logged. But this is not required, right? We need the Ajax request. So we'll start by using pipe. For now, let us use the map operator, and then eventually we'll replace it with a flattening operator. We'll use map, which will receive the ID, and for each of these ID, we'll make a Ajax request. So in here, instead of using the hard-coded ID, we'll use the one from the source observable. So fetch user URL plus ID. Hit save. Now, as we expected, we are not going to receive the information as we did in the previous example. We are going to receive the observable. And the reason being that Ajax.getJSON will return as an observable, and map operator is not going to flatten it for us, right? It will just return whatever is written from the exhaust.getJSON method. So we see the observables being logged in the next notification. In order to resolve it, we are going to use a flattening operator. Now again, which kind of or which type of flattening operator to use depends on your use case. You need to understand the behavior of each of these flattening operator, be it switch map, exhaust map, concat, or merge map, right? You need to understand the behavior, and based on your requirement, try to determine which flattening operator works the best for you. Since we are learning about exhaust map, I'm going to replace this map operator with exhaust map. Before that, let me import it. Exhaust map, and in here we'll write map. Hit save. Okay, now you see that we only received one response, and that is the response for the ID 1. Why would that be? Is because that's how an exhaust map works. Let's head to the slide and understand why we got this response. So we have our observable that emits value using the from creation operator, which consists of the IDs 1, 2, and 3. We also have our observer. The source observable will emit the value 1. And as soon as this value is emitted, exhaust map will map this value to an inner observable, that is to exhaust.getJSON, to fetch the information. While this inner observable is still active, the source observable emits another value, that is the value 2. Exhaust map is not going to map this new value to a new observable. The reason being, there's another inner observable that is in progress, and thus it will ignore this value. While the inner observable for the value 1 was still active, consider that the source observable emitted another value. Since the inner observable is still active, this value will not be processed by the exhaust map and will be ignored. So exhaust map will not be able to process any other inner observable if there is already an active one. It will ignore any additional values if they are emitted if one inner observable is still active. And as soon as the first inner observable gets complete, the same will be received by the observer. Now, if any new values are emitted, exhaust map will be able to process it since there are no active inner observables. And thus, that's the reason we saw only one response that was of the ID 1. If you change the order, say 3 to 1, then what is the response you are going to see? For which ID? It will be of ID 3, because that was the first inner observable. And while it was being active, other two values got emitted, and both these values will be ignored. I hope this explanation helps you to understand how exhaust map works. That's it. That's all about exhaust map. Please do understand that exhaust map only works with one inner observable at any given point of time, because any new values that are emitted while a previous one is still active will be ignored. So, one observable at one point of time. Only when this inner observable completes, there are no active inner observables, then only new values will be considered. That's all for this video. Thank you. Meet you in the next one. Until then, happy coding.